How big's this tank, Dana?
This tank is 750 gallons.
And how long's it been running?
It's been set up since 2003, so 16 years.
Seen a lot of different fish in the days. This is the one that you moved back with the pallet jacks.
It is.
Yep.
And cracked it.
Okay, guys, this next part we're going to talk a bit more. Dana's going to give us a bit more kind of pros and tips and insights into how he would build a plywood aquarium. You know, he's not ever claiming to be the be-all, end-all of building plywood aquariums, but this guy's got, you know, since 1987, that's a long time he's been building these big wood aquariums. He's kind of the standard of excellence in Western Canada and stuff like that, and there's many people that look up to him for his opinions on wooden tanks. So I'm going to give it up to Dana in here, and he's going to kind of lead us through his whole thought process on how he goes from the conceptual idea of building a plywood tank, everything through to the finished product, and maybe we'll give you some ideas on some of the products that he uses. So, Dana?
Hi, Chris. When you're building a wooden aquarium, and we're talking about big aquariums here, I mean, if it's anything under 100 gallons, I mean, buy a glass aquarium. It's just easier, way less work. I mean, wooden aquariums are a bit of work to build. You don't build them because they're cheap. I mean, because they're not really cheap, but they're definitely, in my opinion, easier to handle, just better suited to big aquariums. Because if you're going to build an 8-foot or a 10-foot tank hauling down 3/4 inch sheets of glass, it becomes that becomes an issue all in itself. And I mean, the 750 gallon behind this camera here, my friend Virgil and I picked it up ourselves and put it on the stand. Just try that with a 750 gallon glass tank.
I think I almost lost the friendship with Ray Quinnell moving 260 gallon tanks that we just moved into the basement, and he made them out of like full on 1/2 inch glass or more. They were an absolute terror to get into the basement.
That and the fact if your stand is not perfectly level, that tank will literally explode. So none of that's a good thing. I like wooden tanks because I like the look. They're instantly comfortable for the fish because the back's all painted. They're very durable. They're relatively light, and they can handle a tiny bit of, if your stand isn't perfectly level, like most people's basement floors are, it can handle like a small amount of that inconsistency.
Yep.
So if you're going to build a wooden tank, the first thing is it's a big wooden tank, or it's a big tank. Find out where it's going to go, and you build the tank to the size of the space that you're going to put it in. The process is basically you build a wooden box. You paint it with a 2-part epoxy, a waterproof epoxy, and then you silicone a piece of glass in the front of it. That's, in the shortest terms, that's how you build a wooden aquarium.
Now, the difference is the attention to the details and stuff like that. The type of wood that you use on the frame, the type of wood that you build the tank with, bracing.
You need to buy, do not skimp, because you're going to build this once and you'll hopefully be able to look at it a long time. I know I certainly have. Decent quality plywood, not plywood with particle board in the center, but actual real plywood. And the inside, the surface you're going to paint has to be a fairly decent surface. If it's got knot spot, imperfections like that, those could leak. So buy decent quality plywood.
You always told me to buy a tight grain hardwood plywood, like birch or maple or alder, but stay away from maybe oak or something with a very coarse grain, or fir, which is a soft wood. But
yeah, as long as it all paints really well, because the epoxy you're going to use sticks very well to wood, so it's a good surface to use the paint on. But just a decent quality surface, meaning no voids, things like that.
Big knots filled with
that won't work, because
yeah.
I've seen this in the past of people using cheaper quality plywood. The paint sometimes will react with the kind of filler they use, and now you've got the paint doesn't stick, or there's some kind of chemical reaction going on there. The tank is going to leak there.
Yeah. Is there anything specific for mounting or the fronts of the tank, the woods they're used, or bracing?
Basically, we use a hardwood front just because it looks really nice. It's very durable. Holds the screws really well. And on the top of the tank, no sharp edges, because in the past we've seen any kind of sharp edges, the paint will wear off, and that's
recesses to put sliding lids in and stuff. All that stuff wears on.
It does. So, and keep it simple, right? It doesn't need to be complicated. A thin glass top, you'll never see it on the top of the aquarium. You can not. The sky's the limit as to how much detail you want to put into your lid and mounting it. But I mean, basically, I just simply use glass tops.
You have fun with it. The last big tank that I built, the one that's at the shop there, I built it and I just started playing. I bought a biscuit joiner. Do you need one? No, but I had it, so it was fun, fun tool to work with.
It's a great excuse to buy. It's a great excuse to buy more tools, definitely.
And I remember putting all my joints and everything I put together in the tank build. I used polyurethane glue. And when you use polyurethane glue, it reacts with water. So you know, when I laminated the 2 sheets on the bottom for the real big tank, I put my grid and all my countersunk screws ready to go, and then I'd polyurethane one side, and then I'd wipe it down with water, and I'd put them together and clamp them really quick, and then screw like crazy to make sure, because that chemical reaction, it causes like that. It's like that spray foam. It starts pouring out the sides.
It'll come out the edges.
And unlike that squiggle of wood glue, you get full penetration of the polyurethane. I even took it as far as when I was mounting all my different screws on the fronts and the sides and everything, I actually put all my screws in a bucket of water, and I put polyurethane glue in each screw hole as I was going, and then I screwed it. It was just more for fun for doing it, because when you deal with that polyurethane glue at the end, all you gotta do is take a putty knife, and it removes everything afterwards. One swipe, it takes it all away.
No, it
gives you a nice, quick, easy surface to finish. It's
really good. It's waterproof, so if for some reason the water gets in there, I mean, it's much less of a problem. And actually, the wood grain will tiny, if you have any kind of tiny leaks, the wood grain will typically fill that, and not that I recommend this, but and solve your problem that way. The one thing to remember about wooden aquariums is I hear a lot of stories of people using stainless steel screws, marine plywood, things like that. You want to keep the water in the tank. If the water gets past your paint barrier,
it kind of defeats the purpose.
It kind of defeats that whole purpose. So I don't use marine plywood. I don't use stainless steel screws. I don't use marine hardwood, anything like that. Keep the water in the tank.
And I know your brother was talking big about, because where I'm in the process of trying to plan for the next big build at my place, and he was talking about when it came to the bracings of using threaded rod and all that sort of stuff in the bracing.
Those are big tanks. I mean, the 1,000-gallon I built, I used threaded rod, and you only need to use it on the top braces. The bottom, I mean, without going into a lot of detail, it's a double laminated joint screwed from 2 sides. That joint is incredibly strong. I mean, you don't have to worry about it there. But the top, you're going to have braces spanning the top on big tanks, really wide tanks. My brother's is 5 feet. I think his is 1,200 gallons. It's 5 feet back. He has actual threaded rods in the top brace.
Mounted right inside the brace from front to back.
Front to back, and they're captive right inside the wood, so they never see the water.
And then the whole thing's covered with epoxy. So you couldn't change it if you wanted to.
No, and I mean, on that note, we've, in the 32 years that I've been building wooden aquariums, we started with fiberglass, of course. It's what we had. It's not a great choice because, of course, it becomes very brittle and cracks.
It doesn't handle moving.
It doesn't handle moving at all, and actually, if you take the water out of it, once it's been wet for a while, it will crack to pieces. So not a good choice, hard to work with. We went from there to a product called Aquapon. The problem with that is it's not really water potable. It's not made for total immersion, and people with marine tanks sometimes had problems with the
I also remember that product had a lot of wax content, so silicone didn't adhere to it at all.
No, I mean, it seemed to be good enough, and we never had any issues with the fronts leaking, but you're right. I mean, that more so, not so much the Aquapon, but it's more the fiberglass. That has a lot of silicone, and glass or silicone doesn't stick very well to it. The product we use now is a Pittsburgh Paints product, PPG. It's called Amerlock 2. And it is made for total immersion, potable surfaces. So
and it's got the seals in all North America and in Europe as well. So it's a good product.
I mean, I've been using it for probably the last, I'm going to say 10 years. It is the product to paint tanks with, I think.
Yeah, it makes the tank almost bulletproof.
And as much as it smells bad, it actually has lower volatiles than the stuff we've used in the past.
These products are a 2-part epoxy products. So if you are going to use them, the one thing that you do have to consider is have very, very strong ventilation for them. It's not worth risking your life over these things or anything worse. But also using a chemical respirator and stuff, which is available at any of your home hardwares, Home Depots, Lowe's.
Not a dust mask, an actual chemical respirator.
It's not worth cutting corners for your personal health and safety.
No, and they're not expensive to buy.
One of the other things you never even touched on, but I remember this always being a factor, is heating and stuff like that.
The beautiful thing about wooden tanks is they're relatively thermally efficient, so I mean, you always hear that silly story about 5 watts per gallon, which is ridiculous, but in the 750 gallon tank behind me here, I heat that with 450 watts, and it's got Madagascars in it. It's at 82 degrees. I could get it warmer if I wanted to, but more than enough heat.
And they are known to be extremely sensitive to water parameter changes.
They are, yeah. I mean, move them from another tank, they catch ick, that kind of thing. But yeah, very thermally efficient. Like I said, the painted surfaces inside, the fish feel very comfortable. Really good that way.
Now, have you ever had any issue, or is there any concern you have? I know I've seen a lot of people using, I've done it in the past, where you'll put egg crate, or I've often seen like camping mats, cut out little foam squares of camping mats and stuff like that, and putting them down before putting rocks, because you're dealing with big cichlids, and if a rock were to tumble, it could damage the finish.
On paints we've used in the past, I'd be worried about that. With the Amerlock 2 product, it's very tough. They paint bridge abutments with it.
Okay.
So it's seriously tough. I mean, and use the proper number, like a 3 or 4 coat resume, and yeah, not an issue. Okay. I've never seen an issue that way. I mean, obviously, you don't want to be dragging your rocks across the bottom, but they will handle a fair amount of abuse.
Yeah.
I mean, to give you a story about plywood painted wooden tanks, we were traveling from Regina, which is 220 kilometers from here. We had 2, I think they were 130 gallon wooden tanks, 3-foot cubes, bounce out of the back of a half-ton. And you know, try that with a glass tank, right? But anyway, we went back and picked them up. The only thing that happened to the 2 tanks, the corner was broken on one of them. Otherwise, they were intact.
And they held water, no problem.
Yes, oh yeah.
They're set up an hour later. Now, one thing that really changes the dynamic, when you start looking at building yourself a 300, 500, 1,000 gallon tank, whatever it is, the whole dynamics of all your maintenance change dramatically.
The 750 gallon tank is the easiest tank I have to look after by a factor of 10. The bigger the tank, the easier it is to maintain.
Yeah, because the water parameters don't change as much.
No, and it changes, well, this is a blanket statement, but it changes a lot of the rules of fish keeping. You can keep a lot of fish that you would not be able to keep in a smaller tank. And not just the fact that it's a big tank, but the fact that, you know, the space, they have a lot more room to interact and get away from each other.
Yeah. But the one thing that's really, really notable when you have a tank, say you have a 1,000 gallon tank or 750 gallon tank, an average home house hot water tank is only, what, 30 gallons?
Right.
You can't sit there every Saturday with your gravel cleaner hauling out water to do your 30% water change. It'll take you 2 days to fill the tank up again. So how do you go about doing water changes on your tanks?
The first time, in my previous house, I built a 1,000 gallon tank. It was 12 feet across. And I did it one Saturday afternoon, of course, about a week after it was set up, I better do a water change, right? It took 6 hours, killed the hot water tank 3 times. I said, this is never going to happen. Like, this is ridiculous, right? So, phoned my younger brother and I, we built a lot of stuff together, and asked him, how are we gonna do this? So about 20 minutes later, we knocked off a fairly quick and simple water changer. So now, my whole fish room now is changed by an automatic water changer that, you know, you can set it to whatever time you want. In this particular case, it runs for half an hour, changes 10% of the water to all the tanks you would see down here.
Yeah, and that's basically using a lawn sprinkler solenoid.
And a couple of industrial timers.
Yep. And a 12-volt step-down transformer makes it completely non-lethal.
Yeah.
And back in the day, we used to have to use copper, and that would take days to build.
Yeah.
But now you can use PEX. You can throw this together in minutes.
It's literally like, you can put something together in,
like working with Lego.
in a couple of hours. You can have a water change system for your tanks.
And pretty very cost efficient.
It's simple. I think the whole setup cost me less than $120.
Now, depending on where you live, one other factor you got to take into consideration is your water quality and the water source. In Saskatoon, or in where I lived, we only had chlorine, and chlorine was easy to dissipate. And if you're doing very small water changes every single day in a tank, the small amount of chlorine would dissipate. If you had extremely difficult or delicate fish, you could easily put a cartridge system in line that would remove the chlorine from the system.
Yeah.
And if you were in an area where you had chloramine, you could do the same thing. There are cartridges that can be put in line that can remove chloramine. So an automatic water changer, be it you have a 1,000 gallon tank or you have thousands of gallons in your fish room, an automatic water changer is not something that should be a barrier between doing it. It should be a very, very easy thing to do. It just takes a bit of know-how because you have to bring water to the tank. You also have to find a way of taking water from the tank as well.
In Saskatoon here, we have fairly hard alkaline water, but it is fairly decent water. So I mean, I have a chemical cartridge in front of my water change system. I don't have a sediment filter because the water is really decent quality, and it removes the chlorine and chloramine. I change it at regular intervals. It's what's recommended on the water change package, and yeah.
Well, you've bred hundreds and hundreds of species of fish, and not just Central America. You've bred Madagascar and Indian, and you've kept massive planted tanks, which I'm going to show some of the pictures and videos of some of the other tanks. So you're doing now. You're really strongly invested in doing corridors.
Yeah.
And those aren't hard water fish.
No, not at all. The point I was going to bring up is, what was the point I was going to bring up?
Doesn't matter. We're having fun.
Yeah.
So if you guys have any questions or anything like that, Dana's not going to answer any of them, but feel free to, I want you guys send me some comments and links and stuff like that. And if by chance you send me a comment or something that I don't have the answer for, I can reach out to this guy and he'll get us the answer that we need to know. But from what you learn, this guy's been doing it for a long time. As I told you before, he's my mentor. This is the guy in Western Canada for building plywood tanks, and everybody goes to him for answers. So hopefully you enjoyed it. We'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.